All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our continuing education series, Joining Forces, Empowering Voices, a collaborative approach to supporting adults using high-tech AAC. My name is Erin Edwards. If you've been watching our series, you know our three key targets are building greater collaboration between BCBAs and SLPs, improving services for adults with disabilities, and expanding knowledge around the potential of high-tech AAC. This series is brought to you through the generosity of the Edith L. Trees Charitable Trust. We're very grateful for their support and this opportunity to bring you some amazing speakers. We hope this makes a difference in your practice as a professional and in turn makes a difference in the lives of the people that you support. All of our recorded webinars are listed on our website. There are direct links to the webinars there on the website if you have any trouble finding them within the Learning Management System Lantern. And as always, if you have any technical questions, issues completing the post work to get your CEUs or issues with your CEUs, please use the email listed here to let us know and we will help you out. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Tana Newfield. Tana is a speech language pathologist, AAC specialist, researcher, and the founding director of Accessible, an organization committed to improving the lives of individuals with complex communication needs through collaborative coaching, clinical excellence, and systems level change. With nearly 20 years of clinical experience, Tana has supported individuals across the lifespan who rely on augmentative and alternative communication, AAC, working closely with families and interdisciplinary teams to create meaningful, person-centered communication supports. Throughout her career, Tana has partnered extensively with behavior analysts and other professionals in home, school, and community-based settings. Her work bridges clinical practice and professional development, emphasizing collaboration, reflective practice, and responsive communication support. As the creator of the AAC Academy and a current doctoral candidate, Tana is dedicated to building the confidence and competence of clinicians across disciplines, equipping them to become effective and compassionate communication partners for AAC users, which makes her a perfect addition to our series here because we are about a lot of the same missions. So I will turn it over to you now, Tana, to go ahead and share your slides with us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me and for that thoughtful and thorough introduction. It leaves less for me to have to talk about, which is always helpful. So we are talking, as was mentioned, about supporting adults with AAC. And specifically in today's talk, we're talking about supporting speaking adults with the strategies and tools available in our AAC toolbox. So I want to just give a little brief introduction again of who I am. I am Tana Newfield, and I am trained as a speech pathologist. You heard a lot of the work that I've done there in my introduction, but you can certainly pop over to the links that were provided in the handouts for today's presentation if you're curious about some of the other work that was mentioned. I do want to make sure I draw your attention to my contact information here on the slide as well. I'd love to collaborate. I'd love to answer questions. So if you're watching asynchronously, which many of you are, right, other than those in the room today, then you can certainly reach out to me by email or social media. And I would love to clarify anything that came up in today's talk, debate anything that's different from what you do in your own practice or believe in your own paradigm. And more importantly, just to connect and network together, because I think it's super important, as this conference is showing us, that all of us are joining in care coordination with all of our clients. I also want to take a moment to just disclose some important information. So I am receiving an honorarium for speaking at today's conference. I also receive a salary from 2 major universities in the Denver area, both as a researcher and as a clinical educator. I also receive honorariums or stipends for the different consultancy work and speaking engagements that I partake in, being an AAC enthusiast and also an autism enthusiast. I receive course commissions from a lot of the courses that I present on the AAC Academy and also on other platforms. And then financially, I am affiliated with ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, as well as their Special Interest Group 12, which is for augmentative and alternative communication. I'm also a member of RESNA, ISAC, 0 to 3. And as was mentioned, the founding director of Accessible, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting AAC communicators and their partners. And I am a PhD student at Fielding Graduate University, and a big part of my study, which I will bring into the paradigm that I am presenting this information from today for you, is the use of the relational-based interventions and the use of the relationship in general as a wonderful catalyst for moving developmental skills forward. So we do have a little bit of a tall agenda. Here are our learning objectives in a nutshell on the screen. And in essence, we're going to focus today on supporting communication, effectiveness, and engagement with adults who use AAC in this particular capacity to supplement or replace perhaps speech that is existing in their repertoire. So our learning objectives are going to be to describe some common communication challenges that are experienced by adults that have unreliable or insufficient or intermittent spoken language, which we'll talk about more in length together. We're also going to explore and explain the role of AAC in supporting and addressing those communication barriers so that we can help to foster and maintain functional and, most importantly, fulfilling communication for our adults. We're going to talk about 5 AAC partnership strategies that you can use to maximize communication effectiveness and support for these clients in your care, and also identify some of the key considerations that we should have in mind, regardless of whether AAC is a specialty area or not, in terms of how we can individualize the AAC that we offer and expose to our adults. I'm going to talk today specifically with my autism hat on, meaning I'm going to speak most about the autistic adult, but just know that everything I'm sharing today would apply to any of the other populations that are mentioned in the conference series. Any people who are presenting with profiles where their speech, for whatever reason, is not fully accessible to them would fit underneath those I have in mind today. So I believe it feels best to kind of start with what historically we've thought of in terms of AAC support, right? So the slide here asks, is AAC a last resort? And my response in the short here is nope, it is not a last resort. And we've learned a lot, I would say, specifically over the last 10 to 15 years about exactly how that is true for many of our complex communicators. If we think about the definition of AAC, augmentative and alternative communication, we can see right there that the intention all along was to serve multiple facets of communication needs. The augmentative piece obviously means to augment spoken language, meaning that we know that AAC can be very valuable and effective when used alongside spoken communication. Then, of course, the alternative aspect of that name is much more comfortable and much more common in the historical literature and clinical practice, because we know that AAC is widely used to replace speech when it isn't developing or being produced by people. I'm going to focus a lot today on quoting and referencing the research of Dr. Hilary Zisk and her colleagues. So you're going to see those citations will come up a lot in what I'm talking about. They're also cited and referenced for you in full in case you would like to go read them in the references that were provided with you with today's slides. But firstly, I think it's important to highlight how Zisk and Dalton, which is an article referenced in your references, really talk about the inclusive piece of AAC. So AAC at its most inclusive really covers all of the ways that people communicate, either with or without speech, right, in addition to speech. And it also includes the ways that neurotypical people communicate without speech. And I think there's been a big push to try to bring AAC into the mainstream and just recognize how it's a big part of all of our lives in one way, shape, or form when we think about it under this more inclusive umbrella and definition. When we have that definition in mind, we're also thinking then of the high-tech tools that are at the showcase of this conference and series, but also of all the other modalities that fall under the AAC umbrella, including those that are not high-tech, such as gesture, facial expressions, and body language, and also tools that are writing instruments, typing instruments, drawing instruments, or even multi-sensory modes of communicating, such as through video, music, images, etc. So we're trying to put aside today this historical perspective that AAC really has been seen as mostly that alternative or last resort, the thing that we bring into the clinical picture only when our clients are not showing that they can communicate with spoken language. But we know that access to opportunities to learn AAC has also historically only been provided to those that fit in this category of nonverbal or non-speaking. But more importantly, even within that group, it's been limited to those that demonstrate some level of readiness to use AAC. So autistic self-advocates and contemporary researchers in this field have really urged us to think outside of the box a bit, think outside of this historical perspective, and really put these assumptions aside that AAC is only for the non-speaking. And some of the autistic advocates that you'll see showcased in the literature that I provided for you are Dr. Alyssa Hillary-Zisk, as I mentioned, and Deborah Corbin, who is an autistic adult that is partnering with Dr. Zisk, and many others that I've actually cited in some resources that I'll provide for you at a link at the end of today's presentation, just in case you'd like to get to know some of these advocates and hear a little bit more about how they use AAC in their lives. Of course, we want to think about evidence as well. It's great to have these perspectives of mindset shift, and we do have some emerging evidence from autistic advocates specifically of the benefits of using AAC for speaking people. But if we're being honest, even when we consider the evidence-based practice diamond, as I've put here for you on the slide, we really have very little empirical evidence to help this along. And part of the reason for that is because this is a relatively new mindset and attitude to proceed with in practice. But there are some studies that are, of course, dedicated to exploring the role of AAC in general for adults and adolescents. And this conference is a big part of bringing that information to the surface. But we're really relying here on those bottom pieces of this diamond when we think about how this fits into care. And really that is thinking about caregiver, client, and patient perspectives, which has always been a part of our consideration in moving forward with evidence-based practice. But also the internal evidence that we see when we start to expose and provide opportunities to AAC use for our speaking clients, and we see how it moves the needle for them in their quality of life, in obtaining their goals, and achieving those skills that they've been striving for. So I think it's a good idea to start here by just getting a sense of who we're talking about in today's talk. We know that we're talking about adults who are speaking, but we maybe need to know a little bit more about, well, what does that look like when it comes to me thinking about how to identify clients that I have in my care that may benefit from this type of conversation. We know that non-speaking adults obviously are on our radar when we're thinking about AAC and the potential to support, but there may be some other pieces of the communication profile that maybe are not as obvious to you and the adults that you're working with. Before we move into diving in specifically to each one of these subcategories, I want you to just take a moment to think about your own experiences. Perhaps you're experiencing things as a neurotypical communicator, perhaps you're a neurodivergent communicator, but regardless of where you are and who you are in your life, think about times in your own experience, and maybe some of these situations have come up for you. For example, has a medical need or an illness ever limited or removed your ability to speak? Have you struggled to get a word in on a Zoom meeting and ended up using the chat instead just to get your point across? Have you ever texted or emailed instead of calling someone, like perhaps a supervisor or a friend, to discuss a sensitive or important issue because you know that if you could choose your words more wisely and carefully with less impacts from emotion, that you could convey your message a lot better? Or maybe you identify as autistic or neurodivergent and you have found other circumstances under which accessing the speech status quo seems really less or possibly impossible or preferable for you. So if any of these things have been true for you, you probably are starting to get a sense of some of those communication challenges that may occur even when speech is present and accessible some of the time. And so we're going to dive through some of those, especially the ones that are most commonly concurrent with neurodevelopmental differences. The first one I want to highlight, which is described in eloquent detail in Ziskin-Dalton 2019, and also some work from Dr. Amy Donaldson and her collaborations with Endeavor Corbin, is this idea of intermittent speech. And really, intermittent speech, as it sounds, is really I can speak sometimes, but not always. Why might I not be able to speak all the time? Well, we just highlighted in those theoretical examples, perhaps an illness or a medical issue, such as migraines or a seizure, have creeped into my experience, and I am not able to access my speech because of those. Or I'm fatigued, or I have sensory overload, such as fight, flight, or freeze mode has kicked in a particular situation, or I've become very dysregulated by external or internal sensations. Intermittent speech can also be a result of social emotional state. Perhaps I'm anxious, or I'm under some level of stress, or I'm even really excited about something that's going to happen, and that is making my speech inaccessible. Along that same line, the context really may be influential in my ability to access speech, and that could be the situation that I'm in, or maybe the topic that I'm talking about, such as a highly emotional topic or a topic that brings up trauma in the past. Or maybe even it's that an individual is talking to another person, and that particular person makes speech a little bit more inaccessible for them, perhaps because of the nature of the relationship, or the nature of that person's attitude towards the person who's speaking. The next one in our list here is insufficient speech. And insufficient speech really is limited speech that does not fully meet the needs of the communicator. So in contrast to intermittent speech, this may be speech that maybe is freely flowing, or it could fluctuate in and out, but the speech that is available is not sufficient to meet the full communication needs of that adult. And this could be for various reasons. I find the number one reason I see this is low intelligibility, which is not uncommon amongst autistic speakers due to some of the challenges that we'll discuss here in a moment. There's also some evidence, of course, of motor speech challenges that could make speech really inaccessible or unintelligible, or not fully sufficient for a particular situation or conversation. And I'll talk about motor speech in a moment as well. We also know that language learning and processing differences and challenges with language retrieval could make speech insufficient. So, for example, an adult who may be able to speak on a specific topic that's highly familiar, they have the vocabulary for that, they have the sentence structure to get by with that informal or familiar topic. But when it comes to, say, for example, giving a more formal presentation at a job interview, or speaking to a new friend or a potential partner, someone you want to ask out on a date, the language available may not be sufficient or appropriate to navigate that conversation. So let's talk through a little bit more about what are some of those contributors that I just highlighted that could really result in intermittent or insufficient speech. I think one of the main culprits in our autistic adults is the presence of motor speech challenges. For example, apraxia is very common. Some studies have even cited as common as 64% of children who receive an autism diagnosis receive a concurrent apraxia diagnosis. And what we know about motor planning disabilities and differences is that they often do not go away with adult maturity, but some of the symptoms and complications may subside. But they are operating underlying that surface. And so apraxia really is when a person has difficulty planning and executing the muscle movements that are required to say words. This is not something that is in the presence of weakness necessarily, muscle weakness, but it is more about planning that message that's from the language mind to the mouth and coordinating all of those movements that are required for that message to be spoken at all. and spoken in an articulated way that is clear, smooth, precise, and understandable to the partner. I cited the study here, Tierney et al. 2015, as I said, found nearly 64% or 2/3 of children diagnosed with ASD can have a co-occurring diagnosis of apraxia. So although we don't have firm, hard and fast facts because there are limited studies looking at this is becoming a very popular topic for researchers to investigate because it is becoming clear that motor skills, especially motor planning, are a huge challenge for individuals with autism. The second motor speech challenge here, dysarthria. I could not find any statistics of anyone looking at dysarthria specifically in the adult neurodevelopmental population, but dysarthria is a weakness and or a poor coordination that occurs from that weakness or paralysis of the muscles, usually because of some sort of injury to the brain. So this could be a client that you're serving that has a concurrent diagnosis of cerebral palsy, for example, where we know that the brain has been injured by bleed or by hypoxia, or someone who suffered seizure activity or stroke activity or a brain injury for another reason could very well present with concurrent dysarthria along with autism or other diagnoses, maybe even dysarthria and apraxia at the same time. One of the studies that I explored in providing some references for you all was MyFi 2023, who did a scoping review, not specifically on dysarthria, but a really wonderful paper on exploring just the nature of motor speech and speech challenges in general among autistic individuals. And it was pretty widely accepted in that review that most, if not all, of the individuals presenting with this diagnosis will present with concurrent challenges in speech, likely related to the motor system in one of the ways we just described. The last one I wanted to talk through are dysfluencies. They are also considered a motor speech challenge, and these include challenges such as stuttering and cluttering, which really impact the person's ability to speak at a rate and a smoothness and a rhythm that is of ease and of clarity to the partner that is listening to them, right? So of ease to them and of clarity to the partner listening to them. So stuttering and cluttering are two very different fluency differences, but the literature does agree that these are more common in people with an autism diagnosis than the general population. Cluttering specifically jumps out as being a really common challenge for speaking autistic adults. And I cited some studies, including Scalar, 2014, and others who are kind of exploring this idea of the dysfluency challenges that often emerge in this population. And so all of this to say, just some background of thinking about some of the underlying challenges, even with speaking adults, that really impact the effort that it requires for them to speak, impacts the ability or the accessibility of their speech to them. And then of course, the reliability of that speech, can I pull it out when I need it? And how intelligible it is or comprehensible it is to others. All right, we're going to do a third one here, talk about unreliable speech. So we've talked about intermittent, I can't speak all of the time, insufficient, I can speak, but I don't have sufficient speech in order to meet my needs, possibly because of the challenges that we just described, but maybe even language differences in my vocabulary. Unreliable speech is that the speech may not actually match the preferences or the intended meanings of the speaker. So there may not be a challenge with accessing speech itself, but the message that comes out is not what the learner or what the communicator is trying to express. I think Zisk and Dalton 2019 really put this beautifully in their article that unreliable speech comes when a person's speech and their intended meaning disagree. Right, so this is the unintentional use, for example, of what they're calling an interaction script. And that may mean, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of the scripting piece, but that might mean that you ask me a question and I give you a off the hip answer, but it isn't actually what I was thinking or what I was intending. And this is really an issue of precision then. I can speak something that I want to say. I could probably speak a little bit of what I want to say, but maybe if I have some access to other tools and other ways of organizing my thoughts, I could actually say exactly what I want to say. So some of the reasons that unreliable speech emerges are some of the same motor differences we just discussed, but also the use of echolalia or scripting, and some differences in language processing and language retrieval challenges. So with that, I put a bonus slide in here just to make some connections. There is a lot of buzz in the literature and in the practice world specifically about Gestalt language processing. And, you know, the verdict is still not in yet as to whether or not this is actually something that we should be acting on in clinical practice. But what we do know is for many, many years, our learners on the autism spectrum have been demonstrating these scripting, echolalia, echoic type of behaviors and using them in communication. And so this could be one example to consider in terms of that case of unreliable speech. I did put some literature in your references from Marge Block, 2023, who just kind of elaborated on some of her pioneering work in this field of natural language acquisition and Gestalt language processing. But I also put in there an interesting critical article that kind of counters what we know so far in the literature about GLP from Hitchens, Knox, and Fletcher from 2024. And I thought it's an interesting contrast to be able to position you as a clinician on how to think about Gestalt language processing as something that could be occurring for your clients, but more importantly, how to think of it in a way that helps you be supportive in the absence of really hard and fast clinical evidence. And we'll talk towards the end of the presentation today about how AAC fits into this picture and how it might be able to support someone who you may suspect is processing language on this continuum of analytic to Gestalt processing. But I think it's really important to take away from this slide the picture here of the young man, the caption above his head that says, "I'm good, how are you?" as if somebody has just asked him, "How are you doing?" And you can see by his body language, he doesn't really appear to be doing very well. So could be an instance of that interaction script creeping in and really getting in the way of him being able to say what it is that he wants to say. All right, the last piece we'll talk about here in these communication barriers is a concept called expensive speech. And again, this is highlighted in the Zisk-Dalton article. And also Endeavor Corbin has spoken a lot on this challenge that they experience. With expensive speech, speech is effective, but it involves a high effort and cost. And this may be a high effort of energy, high cognitive load, high social emotional load, or sensory load. And so you can imagine then that speech may be, in a lot of ways, this limited resource to this individual, something that they know they may need to conserve just in case there's perhaps an emergency in the future where they need to use their speech. And Zisk and Dalton really highlight that example well in their article. So why might speech be expensive? For all of the reasons that we just discussed: motor challenges, the use of scripting and Gestalt processing, but also these natural fluctuations in a person's state as a human being, right? If you think about how difficult or expensive it feels to speak when you have a sinus headache or a migraine, or when you have a stomach ache, right? It can also be as a result of an imbalance in resources versus constraints and demands, right? So when I am asked to speak, but other areas are placing demands, such as my sensory bucket is overloaded, right? Or I have a high motor demand, or I have a high social emotional demand, perhaps I'm quite anxious, then pulling out this resource of speech could be a lot more imbalanced than in other times in my day or in my week. So with those ideas in mind, then we're going to dive into here in what is the role of this inclusive AAC. And remember, inclusive AAC meaning our high-tech tools, also the things we use every day in the high-tech world as perhaps speakers, neurotypical speakers, and also neurodivergent speakers. And I want to highlight here as well that the autistic advocates in our world and the researchers that are partnering with them have really done an amazing job of starting this conversation. There's a quote here on the slide from Dr. Hilary Zisk that AAC is for everyone. Mouth words or speech, as we may speak about it in this context, is just for most people. And so I think that Hillary is trying to emphasize here that we really see AAC as an option that supports all of us in everyday life, and that by not providing the opportunity, we may actually be doing more harm than good. So let's talk through a little bit more about how we can do this. The first strategy I'm going to recommend here as bringing AAC to your care is to just bring it to the table, right? Bring it to the table. Many autistic adults have shared with us that they have limited knowledge of AAC. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know that it was available to them. They didn't know how it could possibly help them. Many of the autistic adults interviewed in the studies that I've read and that I've met in my clinical practice also share that they were denied opportunities as children, specifically to utilize AAC, because there was a big push for them to speak, both by their family and by professionals. And so we know that there's been an opportunity gap. We know that there's been a knowledge gap. And so I think the very first step that we can take is to bring AAC into the care conversation. Obviously, we know that there is a special challenge with the adult population in terms of being able to access not only this knowledge and opportunity, but also the professional expertise that's needed in order to move forward with these, right? So if we think about the best practices of getting an AAC evaluation and having a therapist that's knowledgeable in AAC to support a trial and to support intervention with AAC, a lot of that is going to be inaccessible to many of our adults because AAC is highly tied to diagnosis and highly tied to communication profiles that do not often include the presence of what they might consider functional, quote unquote, spoken language. So we know we've got a lot of challenges here, but anybody can bring AAC to the care conversation, even though we know that not everybody feels equipped as a clinician to do AAC evaluations and to support AAC interventions and supports. We know that everybody can start the conversation. So really, we're emphasizing here this idea of providing knowledge and letting our clients know you have a choice. These are part of your agency as a human to be able to use tools that you believe will be supportive to you. And so bringing AAC into the care conversation as early as possible, but realizing it's never too late. Also, as a professional, learning about the benefits of AAC for speaking adults, which honestly, within the last 5 years, this has been a new area for me. Although in my gut, I always use this with my pediatric population. This idea that someone who has intact spoken language and would still want to use AAC as an adult is a relatively new one, even in my own practice. And so, being able to learn more about this area is crucial in our field to be able to support these adults better. If you're a BCBA in the room or another professional, connecting with SLPs and others, not just SLPs, by the way, specialize in AAC, although many of us are at the top of those specialties, but connecting with SLPs and others who specialize in AAC and AT is really a great way to learn more about the technologies and also about the evidence-based practices. And also to open up networking doors and collaboration doors where hopefully you can connect your adult clients with these centers and these professionals as well. On the Accessible website, we have a free directory that will help you identify those who have chosen to put themselves up there as AAC and AT specialists in your area. So you can search by state and maybe find someone in your area that you could connect with in person or help your adult client connect with when the time comes to explore tools. We also have a lending library database on there that you can search by state. So if you're looking to explore some technology with your adult clients, but you don't have any available to you in your work setting, having a lending library connection could be a good gateway into starting that collaboration. I also encourage you, although we want to showcase high-tech AAC because that usually is going to be the most robust for our adult clients. Many of the literature that I've reviewed and the clients I've spoken with my own practice really like the freedom and the opportunity to know about a wide range of AAC tools. So cast your net really wide. Make sure that you're trying your best to stay up to date with some of the most cutting edge technologies, but also, thinking about some of those more consumer, but also old fashioned perhaps methods that may be worthwhile to offer your adults. And then we know it's not enough just to offer these opportunities, but we also do have to be prepared to support them. And so the next strategy that I'm recommending here as a partner is really to honor and model multimodal communication. This is, of course, an attitude change for some of us. It's an attitude change sometimes for the families of the adults that we support, but it's also something that we can execute in practice. So I firstly want to address the mindset piece. And we already talked a bit about that historical perspective of AAC as a last resort. We also talked about how historically, especially in the speech pathology field, we've tended to put speech, spoken language on a pedestal, right? Speech is what we want to achieve. And so a lot of our therapy techniques have geared toward really emphasizing the development of speech. And so even as a speech pathologist, we may have unknown or things that we're not aware of operating under our own therapeutic paradigm that really lend our attitude towards more of that speech is the trump, right? Speech is the one at the top. So the mindset of really embracing and honoring multimodal communication is a job for all of us. Because when we do so, what we do is offer this open door for our adult learners to perhaps let go of their own shame or embarrassment or anxiety around exploring the use of AAC supports that could help them, for fear that they will be judged or perceived as these are not needed for me because of my communication profile. One of the ways we can honor multimodal communication is obviously that we can recognize and respond to these forms of communication that are used by the individuals in our care, not just to their speech. When I'm thinking about multimodal, I'm thinking about all those things we talked about in the beginning of that AAC umbrella. These are use of an AAC system for sure. But if you're working with an adult that's not using an AAC system, as we're talking about today, these may be things that the adult is doing that are not more traditionally seen as AAC or seen as communication. So these may be things like use of sounds, use of behavior, use of idiosyncratic gestures, use of facial expressions, use of media, things that may not be as traditional, but that we can recognize and respond to. As clinicians, we can also set an example in our actions through our therapeutic practice of using multimodality. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that now. On this slide, I've outlined a graphic of kind of what is under that multimodality idea. And so on the left-hand side of the slide, just for those who need support, seeing it and anchoring to it visually, we've got multiple modalities at the top, and then underneath we have unaided and aided, and I'll talk about those in a little more detail in a moment. And I've got a big plus sign in the middle because that plus sign is really there to emphasize we should be thinking about multimodal, not just AAC plus speech, but also unaided AAC plus aided AAC plus speech. So thinking about that whole system, and that our adults may actually need more tools than just one to navigate their lives. On the left-hand side under unaided, we also have speech and non-speech, and I'll talk at length about those. And then on the right side under aided, we've got high-tech and low-tech that we can discuss a little bit. So under unaided, obviously anything unaided is considered something that we use to communicate that doesn't involve external tools and only involves the body. And so these will be things like speech, where we're using our mouth, but also non-speech, such as gestures, sign language, pointing, behavior, facial expressions, movements, etc. In the flip side, aided AAC are those things that are useful for communication outside of the external body. So these are tools outside of the body, external to the body. And they may be things like high-tech or low-tech devices, and these can be dedicated to AAC, or they may be devices that are not dedicated to AAC, but are like consumer-ready, things like a cell phone with a text messaging app or a notepad. These aided devices also will have text and or pictures as a representation of ideas. And so under these two umbrellas, we can certainly model these as practitioners. We can use AAC systems alongside our spoken language, or, and this is a very important point that was brought to my attention by the literature and also several clients I worked with who become very overwhelmed by auditory chatter. Sometimes we might want to model the use of AAC strategies, no matter what they are, even if they don't have voice, without talking. Right? So we want to model that it's okay if speech doesn't happen with the use of these tools. The point is not for the speech. The point is for the communication to clearly come across as it was intended. As we're doing this honoring and modeling of multimodalities, we also want to take advantage of the natural learning opportunities that come up in our interactions with our clients and support those moments, right? Natural learning and identifying opportunities for that learner to explore AAC to support a particular situation were crucial. We also want to plan ahead in our therapy, really to have these moments be intentional teaching moments too. And so they'll start out with exposure, really helping our clients understand what's available to them and collaborating with them as to whether or not they want to be involved in using AAC in the first place. But if AAC is something that a client expresses interest in, there is no harm, and actually there is a disservice to not provide some intentional support and teaching around the use of those tools. And Dr. Hilary Zisk really emphasizes in a lot of her work that one of the barriers to using AAC for autistic adults is that there are skills required for that too, that those learners may not yet have. And so they may really rely on us not only to let them know it's available, but to recognize and to support their endeavor and their journey on learning how to use it. So in other words, just long story short here, this first piece of bringing AAC to the conversation and then honoring and modeling multimodality is really a focus on exposing your clients to the possibilities. It's not pushing systems on them or pushing them away from certain systems, but it's really exposing them to what's available and then collaborating with them on what may be helpful for them on their journey. So when we then think about having more of those intentional learning moments, whether they be in naturalistic opportunities that come up in your interactions or in more teaching and guidance anchored activities, we want to think about why we would model and how we would model certain use of multimodality AAC. And so strategy 3 here really talks to the modeling of AAC as a supplement to speech. So we'll talk through this idea of a supplement first. And really what I mean by supplement is just as you think about it for vitamins, right? So you eat food and that's kind of your main source of nutrition, likely, if you eat food or get your nutrition through another source. If you want to bulk up some of your nutrients, you might take a supplement, right? So a supplement is going to take what's existing and it's really going to bolster it or bulk it up for lack of a better term. So we might use AAC in this regard for communication repair. So this may be when a learner or a communicator is unintelligible for some reason. Maybe their speech is unclear. Maybe their language is disorganized in terms of the typical common shared meaning in the society. And so for whatever reason, their spoken message is breaking down and the person on the other end can't understand. That would be communication repair. When we use AAC as a supplement, we can also use it to expand on speech when the language repertoire is a little bit more limited or insufficient, as we talked about before. So when a learner is talking about something that is new to them, a new topic that they lack vocabulary for, or when they're speaking in a context that's more formal than their spoken language abilities allow them to express, AAC as a supplement may fill in words for that learner's message. Or they may be able to replace words when the language is not accessible because of the stress of the moment, for example. So we can do this in our practice. We can model using all types of AAC, including what's available to us as clinicians just readily on our cell phones, pads of paper, use of gesture. When I model communication repair, I really like to be explicit. I like to kind of do this wondering out loud type of strategy in my therapy where I'm like, man, my throat is dry right now, and I have not had anything to drink all afternoon, and I've been giving this presentation and talking up a storm. I think I'm going to take a voice break for a couple of minutes. And I think that I'd like to communicate with you using my pen and paper here. Right, so inviting your learner into that moment with you, but also being really explicit as to, I am going to do this for me, and here's why I'm going to do it, and I'm actually going to show you how I use communication repair with my AAC strategies. Likewise with expanding on speech, right? If you can't find a word, or how many of us have searched our memory to try to retrieve a word that we can't, it's on the tip of our brain, right? Or the tip of our tongue. Perhaps using some AAC strategies to help with that word retrieval rather than just sitting there, maybe we model how we take that thought process onto an external aided support, like word prediction or an AAC system that has a categorical arrangement where we're like, I'm thinking about a place and I'm thinking about a place that's outside, and we can kind of help our learner walk through with us how we might solve a word retrieval problem to supplement our speech by using an AAC system. We also want to model the use of AAC as a support. And so I'm thinking here support different from supplement, and that a support is really helping me achieve my speech, right? It's helping me achieve my speech. Or it may be a replacement for my speech. So we've got that contrast here in this modeling example. I talked a little bit about the replacement piece in my prior slide when I talked about getting, having a dry voice and wanting to use that pen and paper to talk for a little while to give myself a break. That would be a replacement. But a support is really something that I might be able to use when I want to speak, but I'm getting stuck. So for example, using my AAC as a cue to help me organize my message that I can then read aloud to someone. Or using my AAC as a language map, because perhaps my thoughts are a little jumbled and my language is a bit disorganized, or my interaction scripts are coming to the surface. And when I can see my language in a visual way, when I can create it using my whole body motor plan and not relying on my fine motor plan, I can organize my language and convey my message, right? And that would be an example of unreliable speech, using AAC to support unreliable speech. And this is also where some of the literature that I read a long time ago when it was called echolalia, Barry Prezant's work and others, Amy Weatherby, but also the new literature coming out on Gestalt language processing and the new trainings that practitioners are supporting us with, are really talking about how organizing it can be for Gestalt language processors, or just those who use echolalia for communication, to organize their language and be more generative with their language. So one of the things we're always looking for in developmental AAC work, which we're not really talking as much about today, but it still pertains to this topic in a moderate way, I believe, is we're always working on helping our learners become generative with their language, creating novel, spontaneous messages. And so there is quite a bit of evidence from the past and emerging new evidence that really supports AAC as being a helpful tool in those learners who are more of the Gestalt processors or using more of that scripting. I would also put in this bucket of using AAC as a replacement is sometimes just needing a break, right? A break from effort, a break from the expense of speaking. And we can model that for learners in our therapeutic interactions with them, using some of the examples I've already provided. All right, whoops, I went ahead too far, but here, we're gonna do it. I think I need to share my sound though. 1 second. So I wanna pause here. I'm gonna look at our time. We're pretty good. So I just wanna pause and see if there's any questions so far about what we've talked about. And I also want to pause to see if anyone in the room has examples of how they or others that they support have used AAC strategies for some of these communication barriers that we've discussed.
I had a
You
quick
can put it in the
question.
chat. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to ask you, as a BCBA in the audience, can you describe a little bit more about the link between echolalia and this Gestalt language processing? Because I think BCBAs are familiar with echoics, with echolalia and scripting and that kind of stuff, but they may not know how it's getting framed in that Gestalt language processing model.
Yes, absolutely. I'll do my very best. In the time that we have, I was actually going to try to go to the right slide as well so that we can talk about it and have a little visual support of our own. Bear with me if you're, I lost it. So anyway, we'll try our best to just talk about it without the visual. But a long time ago, I feel like I'm telling a story of like when I walked in the snow barefooted up the hill. But a long time ago, this work on echolalia that came out of Barry Prezant and Amy Weatherby's research tried to make a distinction for all of us on, echolalia is actually not purposeless. It always has a purpose, but that purpose is not always communicative. And that purpose is also not always sensory or self-stimulatory or hedonistic, if you will, just for the pleasure of being, echolalic. So they really tried to make sense of the experience of echolalia, but what they were seeing in their pediatric clients, and really try to help us see the functions of echolalia underlying the semantic and syntactic components, right? And so as BCBAs, I'm sure you're always looking at the function of everything. And so you're looking at the function of echolalia in a very similar way. What Gestalt language processing does is it takes that research that's quite established from the past and it puts it in a new package called Gestalt language processing or natural language acquisition. And it also encourages us as language development stakeholders to think about the role of echolalia in the natural language acquisition process. So for a very long time, echolalia was seen as something outside of the norm, something that particular population exhibited. And we've actually seen in natural language acquisition for neurotypical children that echolalia is sometimes a small part of their initial stages of gaining language. And so that's the first thing that Gestalt language processing really tries to emphasize is that this is not only something that occurs in language development for many children, for a lot of children with neurodevelopmental differences, but for many children across the general population, but it is also something that has a bit of a system that has been recognized. And so the GLP trainings and research that are coming out are really encouraging us to break down the concept of echolalia as it's exhibited in our clients and try to put it into a progression that we can then support in therapeutic environments. So they've created a framework that actually stages, they call it the stages of Gestalt language processing. There's assessment guidelines that have come into practice where they're encouraging clinicians to do language samples and to analyze the echolalic behaviors of their clients so that they can stage them and then figure out how to write goals and therapeutic strategies to scaffold them along this Gestalt language processing continuum. I think the piece that's become the most controversial that may or may not fit into the behavioral paradigm, and I'm not sure, I'd love to have a follow-up discussion here if you'd like, is that this idea that some people are Gestalt language processors and some people are analytic language processors, and we have to teach language differently depending on where the person falls into one of those buckets. That's a very black and white, very literal view of the paradigm. But if you think about it more nuanced, I think what more people are coming to the table with now is thinking of it as a continuum. That even a person who is exhibiting more of a Gestalt language processing pattern to their language, such as someone who is using a lot of scripting or only scripting for communication, that they may be on the far end of Gestalt language processing in that time in their life, but it doesn't mean they have no analytic language processing. And for those who may not be aware, analytic language processing is what we have considered for many, many years to be the standard of the way that children acquire language. And that is, first you get single words, then you build single words up to X, then you learn how to put words together, et cetera, et cetera. Then you get syntax, you get grammar, et cetera. So the Gestalt language framework is really challenging the notion that that is the way that all children should be taught language, with or without AAC, and also just considering, well, then how do we best support a person who is using scripting so that they can use their scripts in a way that works for them, but also mitigate their scripts, change them up, expand the functions, and become more generative in their communication so that they can be clear and achieve their goals.
If I could ask
Does that help?
a quick follow-up,
Yes.
would the clinical manifestation of this look like using shaping to just take that sort of current behavior in the repertoire and sort of try to perhaps have it occur under different functional situations or produce different outcomes? Is that what this would look like in clinical application?
Yes, I think there's some shaping in the broader sense of the word. I think shaping will probably be defined and executed differently depending on who's doing it and under what therapeutic lens. But yes, the idea is to say what you're doing and saying means something. I need to figure out what it means to you, and it may have multiple meanings to you. And when I figure out what it means, I can then layer in strategies to shape you toward mixing those scripts with, for example, generative language components so that you can convey your message in a clear way.
And when you
And
say
lots of different ways sorry, go ahead.
when you say means something, you're sort of referring to like it has a purpose. There's a reason it's happening. It could sort of be a very simplistic, trying to avoid a certain situation, get access to a certain thing. There's a reason this behavior occurs. We have to understand it functionally. And if we could understand it functionally and understand what this behavior does for this individual, that information could help guide clinical decision making.
Exactly. And
Okay.
also with the caveat of recognizing that not all echolalia serves a communicative purpose. And it is our work as detectives, right, to help work with individuals and families to figure out, of the ones that do seem to serve a communicative purpose, what is that purpose or what are those purposes? And then how do we, within our therapeutic relationships, help shape that so that it becomes more effective for that learner to achieve their communication goal?
And if I could make just one meta comment to the behavior analysts that are watching this, an explicit goal of this series was to have these conversations. It was to create the conditions where we're being exposed to each other's disciplines, not just that broad, but like in the weeds, where we can ask questions. So if you're a behavior analyst watching this, there's some interpretation you're going to have to do from to sort of take these ideas and turn them into a behavioral perspective. Others fit perfectly. That flow chart you had up with like the aided and unaided forms of communication, that's really helpful. I don't think we do enough necessarily to think about all those modes of communication and how they could be used to create robust systems. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for these
And
questions. I welcome any more.
I was just going to say, as a reminder, as you said, you have two sources, right? One kind of pro Gestalt and one that's a little bit more critical of Gestalt. So yeah, I would encourage everybody to read them because I think it's just one of those kind of new things on the block. So it's really fascinating to take a look at it really from all different angles and see how it applies to your clinical work.
I agree. I think it's so important when we have these controversies is too strong of a word, but there is quite a bit of buzz around this topic. It's very trendy. I think it's very attractive to neuroaffirming clinicians, but it is challenging because it is hard to make decisions when you don't have a clear path. And so I do encourage everyone to read those articles. They're a good starting point, and push into some of the practical applications that are being proposed as well, and maybe go to some trainings and kind of ask questions of people who are doing this day in, day out, and really try to wrap your mind around how it fits with what you already understand. Because as I said, this is I don't even know what the metaphor is. It's like I can't come up with an appropriate metaphor, but it's an old topic that's been packaged in a new way. And so I would caution you to throw it out entirely because it isn't totally new. It is rooted in some really solid research, but it maybe is a little bit of a cart before the horse situation for some of us who are still trying to navigate where it fits into our practice. I would put myself in that boat, by the way, just to be fully transparent. I am in process of navigating where does this fit in with what I'm doing, especially the work I do with pediatric clients, but very relevant also to the work we do with adults who are still navigating likely some of this scripting in their communication profile.
And I just want
to,
to your original question about what are the strategies we're using in our own practice. And I was thinking of the first one where it's bring it to the table. And I really think that's the first thing that we really have to do is have that conversation about how you're not trying to replace speech, using it to augment. And Erin and I work together, we co-treat, we work with adults. And sometimes I feel like that's the first conversation we have to have, right? Is that, you know, a lot of our patients come to us in their 20s and it's never even been considered and they don't have functional communication. And we have to, you know, present the AAC and talk about it and be like, no, we're not trying to tell them to stop talking using their speech in however way they're communicating, but we just want to help support them. But they come in with all these fears, and even with my young kiddos too, right? It's this, am I doing something wrong by not even trying to develop that spoken language, where it comes to that last piece? But I just think bringing it to the table, having that conversation, and even literally bringing the device to the table, you know, and having it on the table and not making it look like a task and having it just be in the environment and having us model on it. I literally think both metaphorically and literally bringing it to the table is like one of the best things I think you can do, because you have to get the buy-in and you have to address the fears to then get all the stakeholders on board to then be able to use it.
Absolutely.
And sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just talking about myself and how I was just talking a lot.
I love it. I love it. The conversation really brings things to life. So I appreciate it. And, you know, I also think you speak a lot to just how important we've recognized lately how important the concept of universal design is becoming in our everyday lives and how much we're all benefiting from the fruits of universal design. And I think when you bring something to the table, you're really executing the universal design principle, which is I'm just going to have things available. And I don't know if you're going to want them or need them all the time. I want to bring it there so that you have a space to talk about your concerns, your fears, your curiosities. And I'm going to keep bringing it to the table in an exposure way, not in a pushy way, so that you realize that even your feelings and thoughts as a communicator may change over time, as a family may change over time. And I want to make sure that I'm a safe person for you to come back to and say, you know what, that thing you brought to the table 2 years ago, I think I'm kind of interested in talking about that now. All right, so with that, I have a short video to just kind of exemplify one situation of very many, and I really encourage you to go explore some of the resources that I linked for you to meet autistic adults who are part-time AAC users, autistic adults that have decided to replace their speech full-time with AAC devices, and really get to know who they are, get to know their experiences, and kind of use that to guide your curiosity through your own practice. But this was the best I could come up with without invading the privacy and autonomy of these individuals from their social media accounts. I didn't want to share their stories for them. I wanted them to share their stories, but I wanted to bring something that I thought kind of represented a persona of someone who may use this in this capacity. So I think I shared my sound, but I'm sure my lovely team here will tell me if I haven't.
Meet Sarah. She's a bright, thoughtful young woman who loves hanging out with her friends, taking walks in the park, and learning new things. Sarah is autistic, and experiences what's called unreliable speech, especially when she's talking about something new or unexpected.
Sometimes I know exactly what I want to say, but the words just don't come out the right way. Especially if I'm nervous, excited, or trying to explain something new. That's why I use my text messaging app to help me communicate. It works kind of like AAC, augmentative and alternative communication. When I use the keyboard and word prediction, it helps me find the words faster. I can take my time and organize my thoughts. It's like my brain can slow down and line everything up. Sometimes I let my friends read my message right on my phone. Other times, I read it out loud in my own voice, if I feel up to it. Using my messaging app gives me the freedom to share what I really want to say, when speech alone isn't working for me.
For Sarah, and many others, communication isn't always about speaking. It's about finding the way that works best in the moment.
All right, so moving from that then, my last strategy, and this is going to be another one that's controversial, so I'm going to poise myself for the questions. But this is a quote here from the International Society of Spelling as Communication, and it says 26 letters equals infinite possibilities. And really with this, and what we know as AAC providers, those of us working in the field, I really thought this was important as a partnership strategy, not because everybody's going to spell to communicate, and not because spelling is the only way to support speaking individuals with AAC, but because we know that in order to be fully autonomous, literacy is crucial in whatever capacity it emerges. And so as behavior professionals, my guess is you're not asked often to teach your clients how to read and spell. You probably maybe don't feel super confident or competent to do that. Many SLPs, just to ease that imposter syndrome you may be feeling right now, also do not feel well equipped to help clients learn how to read and spell. But it is so crucial. And so even if you know nothing about how to bring literacy to the table right now, I just want to urge you that literacy is absolutely an essential thing to be thinking about for all of your clients and collaborating on. It's not something you can solve on your own, obviously, but it's something that you can collaborate with others in the care team, others in the community to try to figure out what does a literacy experience, a literate life look like for this particular client. And, my main reason is I want to just give you a point to pause and reflect on what are the limitations of picture-based AAC. If anybody in the room has ever used picture-based AAC, which I'm assuming you all have because I'm in the right group, right? Anybody watching, I bet you could make a list of at least 25 limitations of using a picture-based system. One of the main limitations is somebody else has to figure out what you want to say and make sure that it's available to you if you are a pre-literate user of a picture-based system. Now, if you're a literate person and you've decided, you know what, sometimes I think and speak better with my pictures, you can program your system ahead of time and you can use your pictures, but they're going to have what you want to say and not what somebody else thought that you wanted to say. So that's really the main push behind this piece of the literacy puzzle. And what we're talking about today and what many autistic advocates in the literature and on the platforms have been shouting from the rooftops is that AAC has given me autonomy and agency because it's supported me in doing something that I couldn't achieve with my speech alone. People who are not speaking, who are using AAC as adults, are also shouting this from the rooftops. My AAC gave me a voice. It gave me a way to be an agent in my life. But unfortunately, when we can't work hard in a lifetime to create literacy to some degree for our clients, we give them what we can, but we can't take them all the way. And I think many of our clients feel that burden and that limitation when they aren't able to fully harness AAC because of their limitations or absence of literacy skills. So I put some resources in your slides that I think can guide you to just kind of thinking about, well, I had never thought about literacy for this particular client, and I don't even know if they're ready for that. These resources may be able to just help get you thinking about this as a provider, and this is a possibility for the clients you serve. And then if you're a little bit further along in the mindset and you want resources, I put some in there to get you learning about, what could my role be as an SLP or a BCBA in this regard. And I think this leads really well into the next topic that I want to kind of round out today with, which is this idea that we want AAC available and at the table, but we also want to make sure we're representing a wide range of choices for our clients so that they can make decisions with us as their team members on what methods will be most helpful to them. And so I put here together just some things to consider when individualizing AAC, maybe individualizing, for example, what you might bring to the table if you're just having this conversation with a new client and they're not quite bought in on the idea or are not informed yet. But we know that we want to make sure we're bringing lots of options. Or maybe you do have a client you have in mind who's asked you about this, and you want to consider what's the well-rounded menu that I could bring, and why might I bring certain technology or recommend certain technology over other technology. Realizing this is not an AAC training on feature matching. So you're not going to leave here knowing what devices to bring exactly, but I hope you'll at least have a way of thinking about it. So the first part of the slide here, obviously, first and foremost, with our adult clients, we need to consider their personal goals and their preferences. So this may be talking with our clients about the contexts that they are communicating within and some of the limitations and barriers that they experience in those contexts with certain partners that they may be able to identify a need where they need, for example, something portable in a social context. Something that's durable in a dirty context or a wet context, like the pool or at horseback riding or on the soccer field. And so really narrowing in on what does my client want to achieve with their AAC support, or what do I know that my client likes to do, and so I can bring those tools that are anchored to the goals and the preferences of the client. And I think also under that umbrella is the cost of the tool. Some clients are going to want low cost and free cost tools because they have barriers that are preventing them from accessing higher cost tools. They also may have preferences on the platform for that tool. They may want to use something mobile that they already have, a cell phone, rather than an iPad that might be harder to carry around and it doesn't fit into their pocket. So in the feature matching world of AAC, we would be thinking about this as the platform upon which the software is running is one preference, but also what does the learner want to achieve with this tool? And therefore, what types of representations, what software, what icons or text-based, picture-based, etc., should we have available based on those goals? The second element in the center here is also to consider the communication profile of the client. Our clients are going to come to us with a wide range of skills. If they are not literate, then a text-based system is obviously not going to be the first thing that you bring to the table. And yes, clients can be speaking and not be literate, by the way. We know that verbal is different from spoken. And many of our clients who are speaking actually may have very rudimentary literacy skills or none at all. So we might want to put a picture-based system in a client's, toolbox in order to explore that literacy or pre-literacy piece. We also know that some clients may have language processing differences or sensory processing differences, especially through the visual and auditory channel, that might make certain types of AAC more beneficial to them. Right? So a client who gets overwhelmed by visual complexity may need you to bring tools that are a little more simplified in their array. A client who has a propensity to want to do certain things on technology, like play games and videos and that sort of thing, may want something lighter tech or may want a different looking high-tech tool than what they're used to on their tablets or so forth. So thinking about the profile, and then lastly here, thinking about access needs. And this is not something that often comes to the conversation for the more conventional way of thinking about autism, but many people with autism have differences in their access needs. They may not be as prevalent as those that have motor differences, but there still may be something that needs to be considered when you're thinking about assistive technology. So these are things like vision processing and vision acuity differences, hearing differences, and also auditory processing differences. Sensory preferences are huge. I have an adult right now that if you turn on the voice output on anything, he is out the front door. He's a speller. He loves to spell to communicate, but he does not want any voice output anywhere near anything that he is doing. And so that's a sensory preference very important to consider when you're bringing tools to the table, especially if you're trying to make a good first impression. You definitely don't want a sensory aversive situation when you're trying to bring something to consideration for your clients. And then obviously fine motor needs are going to affect the type of device you bring, the size of the device, whether it's a touch screen that has a guide or a helper on it, and then gross motor needs as well. What changes about this client's ability to access technology or tools given their physical state, when they're tired or ill, when they are having pain due to concurrent medical needs like scoliosis or other things that may be in their profile. Will they need different technology in order to communicate when they're in different positions? And I've put together just AAC options. Most of you are likely familiar with all of these terms, but just to make sure we're thinking about everything. We've got our high tech and low tech, and obviously high tech is going to be really comfortable to the people in this series, things that are on mobile tablets, computers, laptops. Low tech are going to be things like communication boards, books, picture communication cards, which are actually presented quite a bit in the qualitative literature as autistic adults share their experiences. Some speaking adults even like to have some simple picture cards or written cards available in their wallets or in their purses for communication that's super important to them when their speech may not be accessible. And then, of course, we want to think about low tech. Some autistic individuals have learned ASL or sign language specifically to take the burden off of speaking, and so they can access that no tech unaided support as along with gestures and other forms of use of the body to communicate. Of course, we're also thinking here on the left-hand side here, I've got a picture of a high-tech tool. That's a typical cell phone using something like a text messaging app, a text-to-speech AAC app, a notepad. I've seen people communicate. Some of my clients communicate by typing into the Safari search window or the YouTube search window. So anything that offers a text box and a word prediction keyboard could be a text-based high-tech AAC system. Obviously, using a keyboard on a computer is text-based as well. Handwriting of any kind, whether it's on something digital or on a pad and paper or a magnadoodle board or a whiteboard, would also be considered text-based, and then kind of that range of low-tech and high-tech. Also picture-based. Adults on the spectrum have mentioned, even those who are literate, that pictures can be really helpful for them in certain situations. Sometimes pictures are easier to process. Sometimes they're easier to retrieve on a large, complex display. And so really involving your clients and helping them help you arrange their systems using the symbolic representations that fit the needs of the moment are most helpful. So as we wrap up, our main takeaways here really are, we're helping our speaking adults with communication challenges add to their agency. When we're considering our AAC supports and our care approach, we really want to consider whether or not AAC could be helpful overall. That's the first question. The answer is probably yes, if you're working with anybody with a neurodevelopmental difference or disability. But then of that, how do we make these recommendations? How do we bring this to the table? What do we think about? It really shouldn't be speech status. It really should be thinking about the overall communication needs and preferences of that client. And the only way we're going to know that is by collaborating with the client and their families. And so they're an essential part of navigating this territory. Also today, we've talked a lot about, honoring and modeling that multimodal communication by first and foremost, and even if you stop here for a while, bringing AAC to the care conversation. And then as you see it open up in your interactions with your clients, thinking about natural and planned ways within vocational, educational, social, and leisure tasks to really model and scaffold their use of these tools and trying out these tools throughout their everyday life. And then, the last piece here is really prioritizing access to these tools and the dignity to be able to know these things and to make decisions about being an agent using multiple ways of communicating and not really making our business about getting to speech. So I provided here a slide again with my contact information. I've also linked here in your handout, you'll have a link to the accessible website where I've put together a curated collection of links that are particularly relevant to today's topic. You also have a full list of references in that slide deck. They're all linked with the DOI so that you can open them and hopefully, pull the PDFs up and read them at your leisure. And with that, I thank you all for your time and for your discussion. I'm happy to pause here if we have time for additional questions and contributions. Otherwise, I thank you all and I encourage you to reach out to me if you have any need to discuss.
Thank you so much, Tana.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
One thing that I was thinking about, one of the things I feel like we ran into, I love the idea, like, and I think it's getting more acceptable that people understand, like, you text all the time, like, and a lot of people don't, a lot of adults I know that have no disabilities don't answer their phone because they just want to text, right? So I think this idea of using different modes and using high tech is getting a little bit more acceptable, where we still run into with our adults, a lot of times their parents and guardians will push back and say, well, we want them to speak, they'll stop speaking, and they still have this myth that it's not going to augment their communication, it's going to take away from their speech. But I think we're starting to go in the right direction. But one thing I was thinking about as you were talking about, like, having all these things on the table, is also to remember that when you have an adult who hasn't used an other AAC, right? They've never actually had that exposure. We're not going to expect them to just pick it up and go ahead and like run with it, right? And again, we run into people that want it to be that magic, like, look, here's another option, and all of a sudden they're like a savant with it, which we know doesn't happen. So really thinking about it again, maybe speaking more to the BCBAs in the audience, but it's not just about putting it in front of them. It's about teaching them how to access it, repeated exposure, repeated opportunities to utilize it, like with your spoken speech or instead of your spoken speech, or like, oh, you're pointing to that, you wanted the apple, and using it there. Just that repeated teaching, because what I've seen, I'm probably speaking for Shannon as well, because we work so much together, what we've seen in our experiences that it takes a while, right? A lot of these adults they've never seen this before. They don't know what you want from them, and then as they're learning, all of a sudden you do see this kind of switch where they're like, wait, this is mine, right? Like they want the device. I use this. I can tell you more things than I used to be able to tell you. And we have a number of people that go back and forth, and some things they'll answer verbally out with the vocally, and they'll answer some things on the device. And I just think that's it's really nice examples of how it can be used and how much it does support, and how excited some of our ladies and gentlemen get when they realize they have more opportunities to communicate.
And to build a little bit on what Erin was saying too, I think the presentation is really important too, that we don't present it when they're in a crisis. That's the only time we ever present it to them, right? When their spoken language is kind of offline, right? And then because maybe they only associate it when I'm highly anxious, and does that make them more anxious? And they develop like a negative association with the device. So sometimes we have to unteach that negative association too. And so I was just kind of thinking about like presenting it, and I've kind of lost my train of thought. But yeah, I lost my train of thought. Oh my goodness. Oh my God, I need a device to help me.
Perfect example.
This is great. Is this what's called expensive speech right now? Like I've really like attacked myself.
I think so.
Right. I'm so glad I could bring it to the end and bring it full circle.
You
but I
gave
really,
us a beautiful example.
but now I kind of remember because I think we have to, in our history with our patients, I can't tell you how many times we've asked them, oh, have they had access to a device before? And they're like, yeah, but he likes to throw it out the window, right? And then you're just like, well, how was it presented to them beforehand? And I just kind of want this to be like at the forefront of everyone's mind when they have the device is not to make it look like a task and not to make it look like a demand, that it's just an extension of communication. It's just another tool in the toolbox, and that you have the agency. You can use it if you want to use it. It's completely up to you. But I think if we're just like shoving it in their face and they're like, oh, I see you can't get your words out. You want to try it on here? Like, you're kind of taking that agency away from them. And then they're like, I absolutely don't want to use that. And then it becomes almost like just like a really expensive box, or like a phone that's just sitting there, or a low tech book. I just think, even like, I think that probably speaks more to BCBAs, but I don't think SLPs think about that. It's like, when am I pulling this device out? And when I'm in the classrooms, or when I'm at job or wherever, is it only at these certain times, but it's not available 24/7? Yeah, so I can see
Yeah,
Lauren nodding her
yeah.
head. I think she wants to say something, so I'm gonna mute myself.
I was just gonna hop in and going off. I think I was picking up part of what you were leaving down, Shannon, where Tana, I loved how you mentioned, and I want to draw attention back to it because I think it's super important and hasn't popped up elsewhere in this series that I'm recalling, is we talk a lot about modeling and stuff like that, but you talked about modeling and gave great examples of kind of some strategic competence, right? Like strategies where you were talking about showing clients in kind of a low pressure situation, like, oh, I lost my voice, or I'm feeling it's a little dry in here. Would it be okay if I write? And I think that has a lot of implications for kind of that self-advocacy and the strategic competency piece, but also for our more, um, you know, um, supplemental AAC users, that they're using their devices, their different forms of AAC strategically. And I loved that you talked about modeling that, because I think sometimes we focus a lot on learning a new device, or our less advanced communicators, and you brought that piece in, and really thank you for having that discussion.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think strategic competence is overlooked in the AAC world largely because I think a lot of the AAC work is done with pediatrics, and I think that a lot of us as providers don't often recognize the capabilities of our children even to learn the beginnings of strategic competence. And then by the time perhaps we get adults in front of us that have had 20 plus years of no one ever teaching them strategic competence, and then maybe they lack the self-awareness, maybe their social emotional development has hindered their ability to know, well, man, when I feel this way, I could do X, Y, and Z. I could choose my own adventure. Sometimes that doesn't come naturally to you if you're also navigating in parallel, growing your social emotional executive functioning system alongside your language and everything else. So I love that you mentioned that. I do think we should be teaching toddlers strategic competence in a developmentally appropriate way, with or without AAC, whoever, it doesn't matter, but they need to know we all have breakdowns. And you look to me as your more competent linguistically partner to show you how I repair my breakdowns. And then you get some caveats and you can take those on your way.
And to kind of build on that too, I think a community is really important, and to see maybe someone you really trust to model those strategic competencies, right? If you're someone who, if you're a support staff that I really, really have a strong bond with, can they model, oh, my throat is dry, let me go on here, or, oh, I can't find this word on this device, let me check out the different folders. Because you learn so much from the people you trust, and you need to see those models in action and be like, oh, it's not just me, it's also you. And so if you can do it, then I can do it. And I think just that sense of community, and just knowing that I can see the models and people I trust and people I see myself in, is really important with teaching those strategic competencies.
I'm going to geek out for a minute, but you're mentioning epistemic trust is what's coming up in a lot of the literature. I'm doing some work on kind of the parental and dyadic components of building communication complexity in very young children. And one of the pieces that have come out of psychoanalytics is this idea of epistemic trust, and how in the relationships that we have with our teachers, our parents, our mentors, our peers, our desire and motivation to learn from the social relationship comes from seeing ourselves largely in the other. So I just wanted to let you know your gut has research behind it.
I wanted to talk about something you mentioned towards the end of the presentation. You were talking about different devices. You mentioned a device that might have a word predictive keyboard.
Yes.
I was hoping we could expand a little bit on sort of when a word predictive keyboard might be sort of a supplement to help an individual communicate, but also where it might become a situation where we're seeing things that look like communication, but perhaps are not really communication. Sometimes when I want to mess with a friend, I'll start a text and I will just hit whatever the word predictive keyboard says I should say next. And so I think we're on the same page that we're not talking about using a system where someone's just hitting a button and things are going to come out. They're going to sound like sentences. They're going to look great, but I don't think we would call that sort of. We wouldn't see that as the kind of communication we're looking for.
Yeah. So in the AAC world, word prediction is used in a similar fashion to the way we use it in everyday life. The intention behind word prediction, right, is reduce response effort,
Perfectly
increase
makes sense, yes.
speed, increase speed of communication, and it's highly useful in emergent to conventional literacy development. So when you've got that person who's got a toe in conventional literacy, their spelling is not great, but they're of an age where spelling really does seem like the least resistant path to communicating and conveying messages. Word prediction provides them a support, right? You don't got to be a top-notch speller, because none of us are right now with word prediction. So I have never used word prediction for message auto generation. However, a lot of the text-based systems don't use word prediction for that, but they use message banking, right? And so if a learner wants to have speed, but also represent their usual thoughts on a topic or usual questions about a topic, I would use that in therapy to create message banks that learner could pull up quickly to engage in a conversation quickly, right? But I wouldn't encourage that learner to use anything on a word prediction keyboard to fulfill their thought. I can't prevent them from doing that either. And so I have never had an experience where somebody is using word prediction to be nonsensical. It sounds like you have. That would be an interesting coffee chat to have, and like break that down. Like, how could you shape that without taking word prediction off the table, which is a really useful tool for other reasons.
I see it as almost like a new iteration of facilitated communication where, somebody's just hitting a button and is creating, fully structured sentences. You're talking about something totally different here. I just want to clarify that. You're not advocating for a sort of a system that is allowing for communication, where the individual doesn't have those prerequisite skills or foundational skills.
No,
this is sort of a supplement to help communicate. I'm a terrible speller, and so I rely a lot on my device to have my words appear somewhat grammatical and spelled correctly.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that question, because I realize not everybody talks about it as word prediction. In the text world, it's called autocomplete, right? And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about autocomplete, but it's built in not only to consumer products, but into AAC products. And it's actually really robust in a lot of AAC products to ease speed, but it isn't about predicting what the person wants to say.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Does anybody else in the room have a different experience or a different response to Jonathan's question? No? Okay.
No, not necessarily, but certainly anybody who is watching that wants to add some comments, and we'd love to hear what they are.
Yeah, Jonathan, I've never done that to my friends, to just send out like I might have to start doing that.
Okay, this is what you could all do. Everyone can do this today after watching the webinar.
Actually, I really caught it. I have to edit a text the minute I send it.
Well,
One typo.
the viral trend was to start a text that says, "I'm sorry for," and then just hit whatever your phone suggested next. So you could send your friend a text and says, "I'm
You'll
sorry
end up with
for."
all sorts of crazy stuff.
It's
That would
pretty
send me into a
wild what they'll
crisis.
come up
I
with.
was
Yeah.
gonna say, it sounds like it'll work best in a group chat, because then you can
Yeah.
get everybody's crazy apologies.
Do we have an extra minute for me to mention one tool to you guys? Sorry, I just interrupted somebody.
I was just gonna say thank you for just bringing up literacy. I think that is super important. I have a 19-year-old right now who literacy was overlooked for him, and he is great. He just wants to type, and he's trying so hard. And I feel like he missed out on all these years. He's got 2 years left in the school system before he ages out. And they're not prioritizing it, but like I'll write something out if I'm using it. It's like to augment like what we're like as a strategy, and he just wants to type everything, and he can type my name, and my name is difficult. And it frustrates me. And I always tell families for like my young kiddos that I do eval, I'm like, push for literacy. Until there's data to support that they can't develop those skills. Just because they're using a system, either it's a communication book or a device or whatnot, until you have the data to support they cannot develop literacy skills, push for literacy skills. Because you're right, because I'm thinking of like language, like, I don't know what the youth are saying these days, like dub or whatever, but they want to do that to have social connections, right? They want to be able to connect and use the vernacular or the language that their peers are using that is clearly not going to be programmed into their device, but they have every right to communicate that and say that, because communication is also social relationships. We talked about that earlier. And I just think literacy skills can really get you there. And I just can't emphasize that enough. And I'll let you finish.
Yes, agreed. And I think the challenge that a lot of families encounter at early stages of development, and even into your 19-year-old who wants to spell and is showing an inclination to spell, is they don't know who to go to. And they don't know what approaches are most effective, because I think their whole lives, perhaps they've been told that their child learns so differently from other children. And every child learns differently. Individualized instruction is essential. However, literacy, the science of reading, is tried and true now for decades on end. And a lot of our learners are getting robbed of the experience to learn phonics at the expense of high sight word instruction, and that is not appropriate. Or they're being lettered of the day to death and being stuck in phonics ad nauseum with no exposure to immersive literacy, comprehension, shared reading, shared writing, or sight word instruction. So I think as a teaching field, we're struggling in our country to understand how to support, but parents have to start the conversation, right? And so that's the beginning, but I think it is a challenging point to find someone then who can take that and support you down the path. And I speak as a clinician who's really struggling with several of my families to figure out how to help their schools know how to do this with them. And you're nodding because I'm sure you've been there too. But yeah, and just along that line, I just wanted to add to Jonathan's hesitation and anxiety around word prediction by mentioning a new app that I just got a demo of that uses AI to listen to the speaking partner's conversation and provide the most logical responses that you might want to say back, while also including what you have taught it about yourself and what you have typed, maybe just a few words in the window. It is mind-blowing to witness, and I think it has some really amazing promise to speed the act of communicating for literate communicators. But more importantly, what I loved is it may also have some application to help our learners who are literate, but also struggling with pragmatics. What could I say here? I think it really has promise, but it's slippery slope because it's leading into what you're talking about, Jonathan, right? It's like, did I really mean to say that? Does my partner know if I really mean to say that? We don't know. We don't know if you really meant to say that. We can only trust that you read it and you said it, but I'm just really excited about where the technology is going to try to help ease this process.
Yes, that's fascinating. Fascinating. I'm sure it'll just keep progressing. But yeah, but those will be our questions and critiques for a future time, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yeah, so again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to just quick plug. I don't know that we have an exact date yet, but it will be on our website. We have a self-advocate that will be speaking with our group in September. And it just struck as you were speaking today, she is going to use a high-tech AAC device for the majority of her presentation. But I believe, Laura, you can correct me if I'm wrong, when we asked her about taking questions or like how that would work for her, she said she would speak vocally to questions that came up, but she preferred to present with her AAC.
Yes,
So
Tiffany likes to plan, I think largely for timing reasons, her presentations using her AAC, but will often take questions using her natural speech.
yeah. So anybody who was really interested in this and really enjoyed this presentation today, make sure you come back in September to see a self-advocate using all of these multiple tools in a really great way to present to us. And with that, everybody have a great day. Thank you.